This time, let us go to Luke chapter 15, and we're going to look at the first two verses, and we're going to see some things in those two verses to help us understand some things about Jesus and his knowledge about Torah. So take your mobile device, take your computer, take your Bible, and go with me to those verses. I will be reading from the King James. Luke 15, verse 1. Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and Scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. And from that point, Jesus answers their complaints with parables, which continue out to the end of the chapter. And the first parable is the lost sheep. The second parable is the lost coin. And the third parable is what I'm going to call the lost son. So you can go read all those on your own. But what I want to talk about is verse 1 and verse 2. In the NIV, in verse 1, tax collectors is the word that's used instead of publicans. And over in verse 2, the NIV uses the phrase teachers of the law, which would be Torah, instead of scribes. So those two things need to be brought out. So let's go back to the Pharisees. Who are they? Are they from the house of Hillel? Or are they from the house of Shammai? We don't really know. Both groups could have been there. We just don't know. Now, the Pharisees are known for setting high ethical and moral standards for themselves, for others, and for the community all around, which is not necessarily a bad thing because high ethical standards are good. And we do know that the scribes helped pass down the Torah because they would transcribe it, they would take it and write it down. And it seems if you go by according to the NIV, they also were helping teach the Torah, the contents of it. So the interesting thing is that both the scribes and the Pharisees are finding themselves upset with Jesus, and they're over there going, basically saying, can you believe this guy? What is he doing? What is he thinking? You know, they're really upset about what Jesus is doing. And this is important. I'll bring this out in just a little bit. But this passage, though, these two verses, and then Jesus' explanation that follows, the way I'm seeing it, it has three things to it. The first one is Torah interpretation. The second one is about maintaining personal righteousness. And the third is whether or not a righteous person is showing communal approval by fellowshipping with sinners. And I'm using the word from the first two verses here. So, what does it mean about Torah interpretation? Well, this is a difficult thing because the Torah does teach, or at least insinuates, communal accountability. So consider Luke chapter 19, verse 17. Before I read that, keep in mind that Leviticus 19:18 is the other center point for Jesus and his teachings, saying love others, which is found in Leviticus 19:18, which is at the end of the verse. But take a look at Leviticus 19, verse 17. This time I'm going to read from the NIV. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. So from that, it does appear that Torah does teach a type of communal accountability. So obviously, when you're reading the Torah, God is concerned with individual and communal righteousness. So we're going to have to interpret that Jesus is going to be consistent with that. Therefore, Jesus is also going to be concerned with individual and communal righteousness. Now, what happens in Luke 15 is that Jesus uses three parables, which I talked about previously, to explain his purpose for his actions. So that becomes important. But this is a difficulty. The difficulty of righteousness and association with unrighteousness continues down into modernity, right here, even in wherever you're sitting and I'm sitting. What does that mean? Let's be favorable to the Pharisees and the Scribes just for a minute. They're trying to have a good, high ethical standard within the Jewish community about what it means to be serving God, serving others. We don't want to sin. We do not want God to punish us. This is why there's such a strident examination of the Scriptures for the Pharisees and so exacting. It's not because they're legalistic. They're trying to be very attentive to God's requirements, teachings, desire, if we could use it that way. So they want other people to be as attentive to that as well. Now, that's just within Israel, but we come back out here and we have within Israel Jesus. And here you have him not behaving like the Pharisees. He's not sitting over here, I guess, in his own little group saying, well, if you want to learn about Torah, you can come talk to me. No, Jesus is going out there to the people who are doing some things that obviously are against the Torah, obviously upsetting to the Scribes and the Pharisees, but Jesus is over there talking with them, and they can't believe this. So here's what we need to see about Jesus and this passage. Jesus is acknowledging a need of those who are righteous to be out amongst those who are unrighteous. So therefore, Jesus is telling something very important through his parables. Those who remain righteous should not remain isolated. Instead, righteous people need to be involved in the community around them and in the world around them. So we do know something else. Jesus knows his Torah. Jesus is not advocating participation in unrighteous behavior. Instead, he's advocating righteous behavior in the sense of being salt to the earth and a light unto other people, which is the foundation of his thoughts found in Matthew 5:12 and following. These become very important. So this is an examination of how Jesus is living out his teachings, but also an examination about what it means to be Torah-minded and what does God really want us to do as people. And all of these come colliding in this one moment here with Jesus, and I hope this helps our study.